Episode number 206, Producing Worship with Dr. Joe Way. Part 2. Let's do it.
This is the definitive podcast for helping you plan, create, and execute dynamic worship experiences at your church. Useful, practical content in the areas of production, worship, communications, first impressions, and more. This is Making Sunday Happen.
Well, hey guys, thanks for hanging out this week. Glad to have you here. This is episode number 206 of the podcast. And this week's show is brought to you by our friends at Subsplash. And just to give you a little sneak peek over the last few weeks and months, our team has been working directly with Subsplash to create an all-new 1230 Media app. It's going to come out very soon. And it's going to feature worship media, all of our worship media content that you can get to, including series in a box and service packs, mini movies, all that kind of stuff, as well as order custom media and see samples of our work. Also, all of our training content will be on the app. So all of our blog posts, podcast episodes from this podcast, as well as our Youth Room podcast, will be on the app, all accessible right there through your phone or tablet or other device. So the 1230 Media app is on its way, but we're working directly with the Subsplash team to bring that to you. So I want to encourage you this week to check out Subsplash. You can visit their website at subsplash.com. That's subsplash.com. Today on the show, we will continue our chat with Dr. Joe Way on the topic of producing worship. We dive right back into talking about the theology behind worship experiences. So more with Joe is on the way right after this. Check this out.
At 1230 Media, we've produced hundreds of graphic design projects for churches and ministries of all sizes. Our creative team can produce sermon series artwork, social media graphics, logo designs, postcards, posters, and so much more. Now, we work one-on-one with your church to deliver graphics that are tailor-made for your congregation and your culture. You won't see any cheesy clip art or outdated designs. Our team works to make sure your project is professional and on trend using the latest design software and tools. Let us help you transform the experiences people have at your church. Please feel free to contact our team for a free custom quote on your next design project today.
One phrase that you used in the book I thought was really cool is that you said that technology is God's modern voice.
Yep.
Walk me through that. What do you mean by that?
Well, it is the way that we meet today, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I look at this all day. I mean, I work on a college campus, right? So I oversee the technology with 10,000 students walking around campus. Every one of them has a cell phone. Every one of them is just buried into their cell phone or their laptop, or when they're in class, the PowerPoint is always up. There's some type of audio. There's some type of video. There is something that connects learning with technology and technology with learning. They are one and the same nowadays. Maybe a decade ago, that wasn't the case. And even in the church, we've seen over the last 10 years, the worship wars. I mean, the worship wars were won, right? We are now a technological society. It is really hard to find a church that's going to say, no, I will not use a piece of technology. Now, Maybe they won't do a full-out performance, but they're still going to use technology. They still throw a mic up and a lapel and record the message. They still try to, create a way to get it on a CD to somebody. So our message today and the message that's being presented, whether it be the worship set or even just the pastoral message, is always tied to some technological endeavor in some way or another. And I think and it's just, they are tied together. It is the way God is working now.
So it is surprising me lately, and I've talked some and written about this some recently, in that I'm surprised that pastors and leaders aren't budgeting either as much, or they budget very, very little for technological advances in their worship experience, graphic design, video, media content. They're just budgeting very little for that. And in my mind, I know it's a little bit self-serving because our ministry does that. So I get that bias. But on the flip side of that, I'm thinking this is the largest gathering of your church. This is where you're going to probably make the most impact to the most people on the most consistent basis. Why are you budgeting more for the flowers and plants that sit in the lobby and not media content or technology that would make the most impact to your people? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, let's put it into pastor's perspective, right? I mean, who's our ultimate pastor? Spurgeon, right? I mean, even him, he said, the best way to instruct is accidentally teaching someone a song to change their behavior, right? It's like he understands the power of media. I mean, and he obviously spoke well, but he was teaching well before media in the way we think it worked. But he understood the power that existed in, he called it accidentally on purpose, I think are the words he used, to be able to instruct people. And so now you look at it and go, okay, well, which way do we nowadays remember things? We are a visual people, as it was just saying. So when you invest in creating an experience, I know a lot of people will roll their eyes and cringe when I say that church should be an experience. Let's put it this way. If it's not, then the Holy Spirit's probably not working in you. Because every time I know the Spirit's working within me, it's an amazing experience. And so when we create that environment and we create the experience to allow the Spirit to work, to allow people to open up their own hearts, to drop their own, defenses in order to be touched. And we can do that nowadays. And the sad part is, who does it best? Hollywood does best. Hollywood can make you feel anything. They can take in 60 seconds a commercial on television and get you weeping, right? And yet, and then we praise that. So why don't we praise that in the church? Why don't we use these same abilities and that we possess, but we can do it for such a greater purpose, that we can make people be able to open up and recognize, their need for God and their need, for the gospel. And so I am absolutely there with you.
Well, what would you say to church leaders that might say, well, we don't want a concert? I mean, this isn't a production, is it? I mean, we don't want to be too produced. What would you say to that?
I think you have a really hard time finding an example in the Bible where they poorly do worship. Mm-hmm. And then God says that's okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, if you can find me one where they purposefully do it poorly and God says you are blessed. Let's see. You can't find it. And therefore, and I know that's being kind of flippant in me saying that. And yeah, and it has to do with context. Are we doing a concert? Well, if it's a worship concert, you are. But if you are being able to create, and I think a better way of saying it is an experience. People who say, oh, I don't want a concert, it's because you're really afraid of something else. And you're using a buzzword that you think is going to create a point without actually engaging in the argument. Maybe there's something else. I mean, maybe they're afraid. I mean, who knows what it is? They're afraid that people are going to get so engulfed in the lights and all of that stuff that they're not paying attention to the word. Well, maybe that's a problem of song selection. Maybe that's a problem that your message hasn't connected to what the worship experience is. Right. Are the pastor and the worship leader talking during the week and being able to figure out how they can create an hour and a half of a consistent message from beginning to end? And here's the thing. I put this in the book. We're not even talking about, just from the time the first downbeat to the time you say thank you, you may leave. We have digital signage in the lobbies. Everything we do, we're playing music on the patio. Everything we do from the second they park their car is throwing media at them, right? And so how are we taking the entire experience and forming them into, better worshipers of God?
You've just encapsulated our ministry. That's what we're all about, is helping churches create their worship experience. And we believe that experience is from the parking lot to the parking lot. It doesn't start with the downbeat. If I roll in and I can't find the sign to the worship center, or I don't know where the bathroom is, or I have trouble finding where to check my kid in, or name it, then my experience is already tainted before I even sit in the seat. So I'm right there with you, man. The experience is taking your audience on a journey from parking lot to parking lot. Okay, so that leads us into my next question, and that is, how does performance impact response? And some people might say, are we really performing? Yeah, you are. So how does a performance impact a response I might get during a worship experience?
Yeah, that is a great question. Because I think it's a loaded question. Because I think, again, going back, there's a fear because people don't like to say they're performing, right? There's a stigma about it.
There is.
But why is there a stigma? Because if I look at this biblically, if I look at Psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, if I look at Hebrews, if I look at Exodus, the main passages I talk about, right? Or just take the infamous, which I love, is because people say the reason we don't need worship is and they'll point to John and go, well, we worship in spirit and truth. Worship is an action. It's a verb. It is doing something, right? It is still performing. It's just the medium in with which you're doing it. So the people who say this actually are using their own verses, their own, they're defeating their own purpose, right? Yeah. And that is the whole point, is when we now put on our performance and we do it to God. And I think this is the most important thing, right? It always has to be a heart check. It cannot be we're doing it for ourselves, and
right.
And when we are knowing that we're doing it for God and one another, and really, I think the easiest one for tech people, and this is just me, take it for what you want. I think that it's easier as tech people because we are in the moment type of people. As creatives, we recognize, you go back to the old DJ days. If we're a DJ, like, all right, if people are dancing, you change the music. Right. You understand your crowd. And I think we as tech people understand our crowd. And our goal, right, is to love God and love one another. And if we can love on the people who are sitting in the seats, because those are the ones we can tangibly impact the most. And this is where, to answer your question of performing to create that, what their response is going to be. The better we get at our craft, we can be able to help them. It's not about impacting them. It's about helping them be impacted by God. It's right. Us, again, we're passive in it. We have an active role that's passive in their growing toward God. And that's right. Where we can really, where we know the better we do, the more we train, the more we invest in quality, and the more we invest in our own spiritual growth, the more we can focus on that person. And like I said already, I like to focus on the back row person. Because if I can touch the back row person, the front row people I got, right? I don't need to worry about front row people. But the back row person, the person who may not show up again next week, if everything I can do in creating the environment and performance can help them understand the message better, that's where we've changed lives.
Good. I was thinking as you were saying that even goes back. It's amazing how it even goes back to like when we were children. If we were children and we were to put on a show for our parents, it is a performance. Why? Because we want to please them and honor them and show them and have them be proud of us and things like that. And so, I relate it to that a little bit in that our audience is God, but we are performing. Mm-hmm. It is a production. It is a performance.
My favorite one, just to kind of to butt in with that, my favorite one is this. The same people who say they don't like performance, ask them if they do a kids' Christmas musical.
Mm-hmm.
Guarantee the answer is yes.
Yep, and it's a performance.
And you'll take an entire Sunday to dedicate to showing off the kids.
Right. All right, so in your research, and this is research-based, if our message is presented poorly, does it impact people's response to the gospel? If I'm presenting poorly, if I'm performing poorly, if it's a bad experience, does that affect the impact of the gospel?
I'm going to give the easy yes. I mean, with the caveat, God can use any situation to make something good happen, right? Okay, so let's throw that aside and let's go with the greater numbers, right? The odds of what it is. People, especially in modern society, and I think this is what we have to understand, and a lot of people who are still stuck in the 20 years ago and not looking at modern society, people are very easily turned off from bad performance, bad media, we see it. We are so thrown images and media 24/7. We know how to turn off what is displeasing to us and turn our attention to what is pleasing. Like it or not, we are fighting with the world in real ways. People are in the seats, we know it, checking Facebook. We know that they're on their Snapchat while they're sitting in the pews. And so are we going to create that and something that can, the question is, why are they doing that? Maybe because of our poor quality is making them want to look elsewhere, right? And if we can focus on higher quality, they're going to want to focus to us and not be a distraction.
So how do I convince a pastor that the quality is bad? You know what I'm saying? Like, let's say I have a pastor and their staff member makes a video or whatever, and they think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I sit there as a video guy and cringe. That's just one example. Let's take a worship leader as another example. You think that he's got a great voice, she's got a great voice, or, and the performance is good, but it is cringely, it's so bad. But the pastor thinks it's the best. So how do you teach leadership the quality line?
That's always a tough one because you have to also look at where they sit, right? If you have a 50-person congregation and you're trying to fill a worship band, to be honest, you're slim pickings, right?
Yep.
Quite often. And so it becomes a value judgment, right? But I also think in that same moment, when you have the smaller church, you now have people who are connected more to the person who's on stage. So there's a little bit of forgiveness, right? Because now they know them more personally, as opposed to now you go to the mega church, odds are, and quite often in mega churches, the worship leader can become someone you start to follow on Snapchat and Instagram. They become their own, idol in a way. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, you have a different perspective on that. So now when you talk about quality and how you can have the conversations with a pastor is really to sit down and help them understand, what they would expect. So for example, if I were to sit down and have you say, give me 3 versions of videos that you think are great. Don't judge this one, but go find 3. Go on YouTube, go on a bunch of church websites, go watch some things. Tell me what you think is good. And now let's compare that, because odds are they're going to go look at the big guys. They're going to look at the people who have an investment. And now they might go, oh, yeah, but we don't have their budget. Do you know how many of these things are done with little to no budget? Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, it does not cost a lot to get a subscription to a media service. It does not cost a lot, to send your kids. What better way would it be to take, one of your teenagers and send them off to an internship somewhere and teach them? I mean, now you're investing in your people. Teach them basic camera skills. Teach them basic production skills and invest in your people. It doesn't take a lot to do that.
No.
And in fact, you can do it for probably very little budget. And the key is making them understand where quality level is. If you're not looking at it, right? I mean, it's the same thing, right? I mean, when my daughter was 6, no matter what she colored and painted was the greatest thing on earth that could ever have been done by any artist, right? But let's be honest, because that my point of reference is that I love the person who brought it to me. And that's what you see when the, maybe the worship leader who can't sing or the, video person who can't produce. Well, the pastor probably says this is great because they love the person who brought it to them.
Of course.
And now, if you want to raise that up, you have to come away from the person and be, and actually look at, okay, what's equality? If I could tell you could have the world, what would you bring me?
Right.
And now say, and here's the thing, is that doesn't mean you now have to go invest. Like I said, the key simple things is great. You love these, you want this quality. Then let's find out how we can bring our current people to that level. Usually it's just investing in training and a subscription to something, right? I mean, like, it's usually very little.
Right. And I agree with you. I think that a lot of smaller churches think that it's out of their realm, can't afford it, when they'll be surprised. Or on the flip side, a lot of maybe smaller churches will look at some of the subscription services or our ministry and say, whoa, too expensive. And so I want to say, actually, if you compared it this way, it's really not. Like if you spent, $40,000 a year, $50,000 a year on a person that's there full time, and you can get all of this if you did it a different way. Like there are different things that you can do, or you can have one person on staff and outsource some other stuff. I mean, there are ways that you can get a higher quality experience without having to spend a ton of money.
Absolutely.
It is possible. Okay, so are we doing church wrong? And your findings or your study, is there anything that we should change about how we're doing church in 2019?
Wow. Okay, there's a question. Are we doing church wrong? All right, I'm going to say, actually, I say we're not, only because God works through history in the way he wants to work through history, and we are the church we are today because this is how he wants it to be. But though he wants, obviously, more people brought into the family. However, I'm going to give the caveat to that. Okay. And this is the whole of my very final chapter, which anyone who gets the book can read that entire chapter in 30 seconds. It's the shortest one, but it actually brings out the best question. And that is, why would we expect anyone to take us seriously if we ourselves are not investing in our own theological understanding of our craft? So I will say that probably as tech people, as creatives, we probably don't invest as much in understanding our full role as we could. And in that way, we are doing church wrong because we could do it better. I think the products we do are great, right? Obviously, the impact that we're making in society is huge, right? There wouldn't be over 2 billion people who are Christians if we were doing something wrong, right? We got to be doing something right. But I think we can do it better for sure.
Good. All right. So in closing, tell us why we need to understand the history of producing worship and why it matters to us today. Why should we know our history?
Without doing the cliche, you're doomed to repeat it. But, and really, we can understand our role within God's meta narrative, right? God works through history, and we see that God has always worked through artists from the beginning of time through, and he will continue through the end. Even if we look at the book of Revelation, look at the way that, heaven is described within streets of gold and just everything that is very visual, right? We have a role in being able to create all of that. And this is where it's important for us to understand how God has done this through artists through time. We are just part right now in his greater meta narrative. And that's why we should really look at how are we fulfilling that? Not just as someone who shows up on a Sunday to run a soundboard or to click through ProPresenter slides or, change light colors. But how are we truly moving the church forward in a way that will impact lives for the future.
Good. Well, Joe, thank you so much for your time today, man. I really appreciate it. Tell us how we can get the book, how we can keep up with you.
Yep. Hey, thank you so much for having me on. This has been just a pleasure. I absolutely love being able to talk about this and, and hopefully be able to change hearts. So you can obviously find the book on Amazon and now in Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. I'm totally just blessed and blown away. But it is Producing Worship. You can find me at Josiah Way on all social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, you name it. So it's at Josiah Way is my handle for everywhere, and producingworship.com is the website for the book. Tell 100 of your closest friends about it.
Awesome. Well, man, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, thank you.
The show notes for this episode are available now at makingsundayhappen.com.
Next week on the podcast, we'll be starting a 2-part series with Christine Kresher on how to build and sustain a thriving volunteer ministry at your church. We'll be showing Christine's full, unedited talk from SALT 18, all about how to build and sustain volunteers. So you want to be here for that. And speaking of volunteers, I want to tell you about a book that I wrote a couple of years ago called The Ultimate Production Team Handbook. Now, I wrote this book specifically for church media teams, as I was a church media director on staff at a couple of different churches. So that was the basis in which I wrote it. And it includes everything that I used on staff at these churches, most notably New Spring Church in South Carolina. It includes production team checklists for every position, scheduling templates, training guides, and all kinds of stuff. It's loaded down with everything that I used to lead a team of over 150 production volunteers at a campus of New Spring Church. So you want to pick that up. Just go to 1230.media/handbook. That's 1230.media/handbook. And let me tell you about a way that you can get $5 off the handbook. You can use the code 10handbook, 10, then the word handbook, 10handbook, all one word, for $5 off the book. So that makes the handbook only $10 for you. And you can take that book, you can make as many copies of the documents in the book as you need for your team. So we give you permission to do that. There's a website inside the book that you can go to, a URL that you can go to download Word documents that are editable that you can take and use for your team. I've really tried to set you up well to have a huge jump start with your media production team, but you can use this handbook with any volunteer team in your church. So I'll tell you more about it next week, but as we welcome Christine and talk all about volunteers. But if you want to go ahead and get that handbook, it's 1230.media/handbook. Again, the code 10handbook for $5 off. All right. Again, next week, Christine Kresher will be looking at her SALT 18 workshop, all about how to build and sustain a thriving volunteer ministry. That starts next week. And check out the show notes page for this episode of the podcast. Just visit makingsundayhappen.com. Click on episode number 206, and you can watch and listen to the show, get some additional resources and more. makingsundayhappen.com. Just click on episode 206. Well, thank you guys for listening this week. Go out there and create some incredible worship experiences this weekend. I'll catch you next week.
Making Sunday Happen is a production of the ministry of 1230 Media. For show notes, archive episodes, and more free resources for your church, visit makingsundayhappen.com.